3 years ago, I noticed a pattern in my emergency practice that shook me to my core. Patients would come in after enduring chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery fighting cancer with everything they had, and many of them were declared cancer-free. Yet months later, they'd return, often with the disease more aggressive than before. Different people, different cancers, the same grim story. One encounter still haunts me. A 3-year-old breast cancer survivor, exhausted and frustrated, asked, "Dr. Becker, I did everything they told me. I suffered through chemo, lost my hair, couldn't eat for weeks. They said I was cancer-free. So why am I back here 9 months later with tumors in my liver?" Her words lingered, pressing me to dig deeper. What I found in the research challenged everything I thought I knew. I'm Dr. Becker, and after 20 years in emergency medicine, I've seen both acute crises and the slow, silent decline that leads to them. What I'm about to share comes from hundreds of studies, decades of research into cancer metabolism, and careful observation of patients over 65. And here's the truth no one talks about. The foods you eat daily, the meals you think are healthy could be fueling cancer. And the treatments being used at every major cancer center might, in some cases, make it worse. The scale is staggering. In the United States alone, nearly 1,700 people die from cancer every day. We spend billions on treatments that often fail to extend survival in meaningful ways for most cancers. But there is a fundamentally different approach, one based on the actual energy sources cancer cells rely on that shows remarkable results in patients who've tried it. Today, I'll walk you through the research ignored for nearly a century, explain the biological mechanisms driving uncontrolled cancer growth, and show which foods feed cancer versus which can starve it all without the toxicity of conventional treatments. Cancer is not merely a genetic curse. Think of it as an energy problem. Cancer cells switch from one fuel system to another, and that switch drives the disease. Understanding this changes everything. The trail of research that changed my perspective begins almost a century ago with Otto Warburg, a German scientist. In the 1920s and 30s, Warburg made a discovery that should have rewritten cancer treatment. He found that cancer cells metabolize energy fundamentally differently than normal cells. One finding stopped me cold. Give a rat with a large tumor cyanide, and the rat dies instantly. Yet the tumor continues to grow. Cyanide kills by blocking oxygen-dependent energy production, known as oxidative phosphorylation, the way normal cells generate power. Tumors, however, survive. They rely on an ancient fermentation process that requires no oxygen at all. Warburg hypothesized that cancer begins when mitochondria, the tiny power plants in our cells, become damaged. When this happens gradually over time, cells adapt, switching to this primitive fermentation process, the same one bacteria used billions of years ago before oxygen existed. Mitochondria don't just produce energy, they also regulate whether a cell performs its specialized function or divides uncontrollably. When they fail, that regulation disappears, and cells start proliferating unchecked. That is cancer. For decades, Warburg's work was largely ignored. Oncology instead focused on the idea that cancer is primarily caused by DNA mutations. But modern research confirms Warburg's insights. A 2024 meta-analysis in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences examined data from over 12,000 people across 32 studies. The results were clear. Chronic fatigue syndrome patients had 30–50% fewer mitochondria in their cells than healthy individuals. Type 2 diabetics showed 30% fewer mitochondria in muscle and pancreas cells. Heart disease patients had 40% fewer in cardiac muscle. Alzheimer's patients lost 30–50% of mitochondria in brain neurons. Cancer patients showed the same pattern across every type studied. The takeaway is simple but profound. Age-related diseases, including cancer, share a common underlying problem. Cellular power plants are failing. When mitochondria decline, organs lose function. The brain struggles, the heart weakens, metabolism falters, and cells grow out of control because the organelle that regulates growth is compromised. The implications of mitochondrial dysfunction go beyond just energy loss. They determine how quickly we age and whether diseases like cancer take hold. A study from the Buck Institute for Research on Aging tracked 847 adults over 65 for 8 years, measuring mitochondrial density using advanced imaging. Those who maintained or increased their mitochondrial count experienced 67% slower cognitive decline, 42% better physical endurance, and 53% lower rates of age-related disease. This wasn't subjective. Objective cognitive tests and physical performance metrics confirmed it. Cellular energy capacity, in other words, dictates both how fast we age and our vulnerability to cancer. Warburg also made an important observation about how cancer begins. If oxidative phosphorylation is damaged too rapidly, the cell dies. Dead cells cannot become cancerous. Cancer requires chronic, gradual mitochondrial damage, giving the cell time to switch to fermentation as an alternative energy source. And fermentation has specific fuel requirements. This discovery unlocked a critical insight. Cancer cells rely heavily on glucose and, as recent research shows, glutamine, to fuel their uncontrolled growth. Normal cells are metabolically flexible. They can switch between glucose, fat, and ketone bodies. Cancer cells cannot. They're locked into fermentation and dependent on specific nutrients. Understanding why mitochondria fail involves 5 interconnected systems, each compounding the others. System 1 is oxidative stress. Mitochondria burn fuel to generate energy, producing free radicals that damage their structure. In youth, antioxidants neutralize most of this damage. By age 60, antioxidant production drops 30–40%, while free radical production increases. A 2023 study in aging cells showed mitochondrial DNA in 70-year-olds had 3 times more oxidative damage than in 3–0-year-olds. This cumulative damage explains declining energy with age. System 2 is chronic inflammation, sometimes called inflammaging. Persistent activation of the immune system triggered by poor gut health, processed foods, toxins, or stress causes inflammatory molecules called cytokines to accumulate. These molecules normally help recycle damaged mitochondria, but chronic inflammation accelerates destruction, harming even healthy mitochondria. Research in the journal Immunity demonstrated that every 1 0-point increase in cytokine levels corresponds to an 8% drop in mitochondrial density. The immune system, intended to protect, inadvertently sabotages cellular energy. System 3 is sleep deprivation. Deep, slow-wave sleep triggers mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria to replace those lost during the day. Imaging studies in Science Advances reveal that mitochondrial repair peaks between 1 and 3 a.m. Disrupted deep sleep reduces mitochondrial creation by 47%, even if total sleep hours are adequate. Without quality sleep, energy deficits accumulate daily, slowly eroding cellular function. System 4 involves NAD plus nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, a molecule essential for energy production. Think of NAD plus as the ignition key for mitochondria. Levels drop by 50% between ages 40 and 60, limiting energy production no matter how much food you eat. A 2022 trial in Nature, Metabolism showed supplementing with NAD plus precursors significantly boosted mitochondrial efficiency and ATP output within 6 weeks. System 5 is nutrient deficiencies. Mitochondria require cofactors like B vitamins, coenzyme Q10, magnesium, and iron. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found 74% of adults over 65 were deficient in at least 2 mitochondrial cofactors, and 41% lacked 4 or more. Even if standard blood tests appear normal, missing these nutrients compromises energy production. Crucially, these systems don't act in isolation, they amplify each other. Oxidative stress plus inflammation plus poor sleep doesn't just triple the damage, it multiplies it exponentially. That's why some people decline rapidly while others maintain robust health. Genetics play a far smaller role than previously thought. Instead, the cascade of failing systems determines biological age and disease risk. For decades, medicine focused on cancer as a genetic disease. Mutations in DNA drive cells out of control. I believe this too, until a meta-analysis compared chronological aging with biological aging, tracking markers like inflammation, oxidative stress, and metabolic health. Chronological age had almost no correlation with mitochondrial health or cancer risk. Biological age predicted mitochondrial density with 92% accuracy. In other words, the years you've lived matter far less than how well you maintain cellular health. Here's the paradigm shift. The mutations oncologists obsess over aren't the cause, they're the effect. Dysfunctional mitochondria produce reactive oxygen species, free radicals that damage DNA, proteins, and lipids. Mutations, such as p53 or EGFR changes, are downstream consequences. Cancer isn't primarily a genetic curse. It's a metabolic disease driven by failing mitochondria. If mitochondria are damaged, cancer cells can't use oxygen for energy, they rely on fermentation. Glucose and glutamine become their lifeline. Cut off these fuels, and cancer cells face severe metabolic stress, while normal cells with healthy mitochondria continue to thrive. This principle underlies the dietary and metabolic strategies that follow, giving us a way to starve cancer without the toxicity of traditional treatments. Now that we understand cancer as a metabolic disease driven by mitochondrial failure, the next question is, what do we do with this knowledge? How do we use it to protect healthy cells while starving cancer cells? The answer lies in precision nutrition, targeted supplementation, lifestyle changes, and strategic metabolic interventions. This isn't about deprivation or fad diets. It's about creating an environment where your normal cells thrive and cancer cells struggle to survive. Priority 1 is controlling glucose, the primary fuel for cancer cells. Every time you eat foods that spike blood sugar, you feed tumors directly. Research is clear. Refined carbohydrates, added sugars, and high glycemic foods are the main culprits. That means eliminating table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, honey, agave, even natural sweeteners that spike insulin. Fruit juices, even fresh squeezed, are concentrated sugar bombs. White bread, white rice, white pasta, crackers, cookies, cakes, pastries, muffins, and cereals with added sugar all raise blood glucose dangerously high. Even foods marketed as healthy, like certain granola bars, protein bars, or commercial yogurts, often contain more sugar than ice cream. But glucose comes from more than just obvious sweets. Whole wheat bread can raise blood sugar almost as much as white bread. Dried fruits and processed potatoes, like baked or mashed potatoes, can create massive spikes. A baked potato has a glycemic index of 95, nearly identical to pure glucose. Understanding this is critical. Controlling blood sugar isn't just about cutting candy, it's about rethinking almost every carbohydrate you consume. The foods you should emphasize are non-starchy vegetables, healthy fats, and nutrient-dense proteins. Leafy greens, spinach, kale, arugula, Swiss chard form the foundation. Cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage provide fiber, micronutrients, and compounds that support mitochondrial function with minimal impact on blood sugar. Healthy fats become your primary energy source. Extra virgin olive oil, avocados, nuts like walnuts and pecans, and seeds such as chia and flax. Wild-caught fatty fish like salmon, sardines, and mackerel supply omega-3s that reduce inflammation and strengthen mitochondrial membranes. High-quality proteins are essential, but quantity matters less than source. Grass-fed beef, pasture-raised poultry, wild-caught fish, and eggs from pastured hens provide essential amino acids without spiking glucose. Organ, meats, liver, heart, kidney are especially potent, supplying B vitamins, coenzyme Q10, iron, and other critical mitochondrial cofactors. If consuming organ meats isn't feasible, desiccated organ supplements from grass-fed sources provide an effective alternative, typically 3-6 capsules daily. The goal of these dietary changes is to stabilize blood glucose, ideally between 70 and 90 mg (dl). Achieving this shifts the body into producing ketone bodies, water-soluble molecules derived from fat breakdown. Normal cells with healthy mitochondria can efficiently use ketones as an alternative fuel, but cancer cells cannot, they lack the necessary machinery. This metabolic switch allows healthy cells to flourish while placing cancer cells under significant stress. A 1-2 Weak study in cell metabolism tested a calorie-restricted ketogenic diet in sedentary adults aged 65-80. Participants experienced a 69% increase in mitochondrial content, improved energy, sharper cognition, and better metabolic health. Importantly, while ketogenic diets don't directly kill cancer cells, they strengthen healthy cells, making them more resilient to stress and less likely to support tumor growth. Starving cancer cells requires additional steps beyond ketones. Glutamine restriction is the next priority. Glutamine is the second key fuel for cancer cells, but unlike glucose, you can't remove it through diet alone. The body produces glutamine naturally, and it's present in virtually all protein-containing foods. Targeted pharmaceutical interventions like 6-diazo, 5-oxo, L-norlucine, DON, block cancer cells' glutamine utilization pathways. Preclinical studies combining glucose restriction with glutamine-blocking drugs created a synergistic effect, placing tumors under severe metabolic stress while sparing healthy cells. Researchers call this the press-pulse strategy: continuous metabolic pressure through diet, the press, and intermittent pharmacological intervention, the pulse. Lower drug doses are sufficient, reducing toxicity and improving effectiveness. Priority 3 is supporting and regenerating mitochondria in your healthy cells. Cancer is fundamentally about damaged mitochondria, so while you starve tumor cells, you must nourish your normal cells. Key nutrients include coenzyme Q, 10-ubiquinol form, 200 mg daily with fat, which reduces fatigue and supports ATP production, NAD+ precursors like NMN, 250-500 mg morning on empty stomach, to boost cellular energy, and alpha-lipoic acid, 600 mg daily, to protect mitochondria from oxidative damage. PQQ, 20 mg daily, stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis, creating new power plants within cells. Food sources, like natto for PQQ, can complement supplementation. This strategy sets the stage for a multi-layered approach: glucose and glutamine restriction, mitochondrial support, anti-inflammatory foods, strategic exercise, and optimized sleep. Each intervention amplifies the others, creating a metabolic environment hostile to cancer, yet supportive of healthy cells. Beyond diet and targeted nutrients, lifestyle interventions are crucial for creating a metabolic environment that supports healthy cells while stressing cancer cells. One of the most powerful non-dietary interventions is high-intensity interval training, or HIIT. Even in older adults who are sedentary, carefully structured intervals can trigger mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria in cells, dramatically improving energy production, endurance, and cellular resilience. A landmark study in cell metabolism tested this approach in adults aged 65 to 80 who had been largely inactive. Participants completed 6 cycles of 30 seconds of high-effort activity, followed by 3 minutes of recovery 3 times per week. Within 12 weeks, mitochondrial content increased by 69%, and participants' overall energy, cognitive clarity, and physical capacity improved markedly. The key mechanism is the activation of AMPK, a master switch for mitochondrial growth. When your cardiovascular system is pushed just beyond comfort, AMPK signals your cells to build more mitochondria, preparing the body for future energy demands. The sweet spot for most seniors is perceived exertion around 7 out of 10, breathing hard, conversation difficult, but not impossible. Equipment isn't critical. Recumbent bikes, ellipticals, or brisk walking intervals all work. Consistency is non-negotiable. 3 sessions per week, maintained steadily, are far more effective than sporadic efforts. Sleep is the next critical pillar. Mitochondrial repair occurs primarily during deep, slow-wave sleep. Chronic sleep deprivation disrupts this process, accelerating oxidative stress and cellular decline. Specialized studies using real-time imaging show mitochondrial biogenesis peaks between 1 and 3 a.m. Disrupted deep sleep, even when total sleep hours are adequate, reduces this regeneration by nearly half. Optimizing sleep means maintaining a dark bedroom, keeping temperatures between 65 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit, avoiding fluids 3 hours before bed to prevent awakenings, and adhering to a consistent bedtime to align with natural sleep cycles. Protecting these deep cycles ensures that your mitochondria can repair and replicate effectively, supporting both cognitive and physical health while enhancing resistance to cancer development. Managing chronic inflammation is equally essential. Chronic inflammatory signals, often triggered by poor gut health, processed foods, environmental toxins, or stress, accelerate mitochondrial destruction. Seed oils like soybean, corn, canola, and cottonseed, common in processed and restaurant foods, are high in omega-6 fatty acids that drive inflammation. Reducing or eliminating these oils, avoiding fried and heavily processed foods, and emphasizing anti-inflammatory alternatives is key. Omega-3 rich foods, such as wild-caught fatty fish and probiotic sources like unsweetened yogurt, kefir, and sauerkraut support gut health. Prebiotic fibers from asparagus, garlic, onions, and artichokes feed healthy gut bacteria. Specific anti-inflammatory compounds like curcumin from turmeric, enhanced with black pepper for absorption, and fresh or supplemented ginger provide additional protection. Together, these dietary strategies reduce systemic inflammation, protecting mitochondria from unnecessary damage. Combining these interventions, glucose restriction, enhanced mitochondrial support, strategic exercise, sleep optimization, and inflammation management creates a comprehensive metabolic environment. In this environment, cancer cells struggle to survive because they rely on glucose and glutamine, fuels now limited, while healthy cells thrive due to improved mitochondrial function, better energy efficiency, and reduced oxidative stress. The synergy between these lifestyle and dietary interventions is far greater than any single measure alone. Each system amplifies the others, resulting in exponential benefits to cellular health and resilience. We must also examine conventional cancer treatments in this context. Research shows that radiation and high-dose steroids, often used to treat aggressive cancers like glioblastoma, can paradoxically feed tumors with the very fuels glucose and glutamine they depend on. Radiation elevates glutamine in the tumor microenvironment, and steroids spike blood glucose, inadvertently giving cancer cells a metabolic advantage. Standard of care treatments without metabolic considerations can therefore exacerbate the problem, highlighting the importance of integrating metabolic strategies early in care. Using metabolic interventions before surgery, radiation, or chemotherapy can shrink tumors, reduce inflammation, and make subsequent treatments safer and more effective. Implementing these strategies requires a phased, sustainable approach. Overhauling your life overnight risks burnout and failure. Begin by optimizing sleep and removing processed carbohydrates for 3 weeks. Once these foundations are solid, incorporate healthy fats and interval training over the next 3 weeks. Gradually add targeted supplements and refine your dietary approach. Building these habits incrementally allows mitochondria to regenerate and strengthens your metabolic environment without overwhelming your system. Noticeable improvements like mental clarity and increased stamina typically appear within 2-3 weeks, but full mitochondrial transformation often takes 6 months, the same time your cells might otherwise continue declining. When approaching cancer through a metabolic lens, timing and sequencing matter. The research and clinical outcomes consistently show that patients who layer interventions in phases achieve far better results than those who attempt a full overhaul immediately. Common mistakes include going too hard on carbohydrate restriction at once, which can cause fatigue and discouragement, taking supplements without the dietary foundation, being inconsistent with protocols, and neglecting sleep. Each of these missteps undermines mitochondrial recovery and diminishes the effectiveness of metabolic interventions. The key is consistency, gradual integration, and reinforcing each layer before moving to the next. Medications can also have a hidden impact on cellular energy. Statins, beta blockers, and metformin, commonly prescribed for cholesterol, blood pressure, and diabetes, can deplete essential mitochondrial cofactors like coenzyme Q10. This depletion directly impairs cellular energy production. Many patients experience dramatic improvements in fatigue, cognition, and physical capacity once these medication-induced deficiencies are addressed with appropriate supplementation. Your doctor should monitor these interactions closely, but often the focus remains solely on the primary disease rather than the downstream effects on mitochondrial function. Cancer isn't an inevitable genetic curse, it's a measurable metabolic disease. Mitochondrial dysfunction drives the process, and the fuels that feed or starve cancer are within your control. Refined carbohydrates, sugars, and processed foods feed tumors directly, while a comprehensive metabolic strategy can starve them. This includes glucose restriction through diet, glutamine limitation via targeted pharmaceuticals, mitochondrial support with nutrients like CoQ10, NAD+ precursors, PQQ, and alpha-lipoic acid, inflammation management, quality sleep, and strategic exercise. Together, these interventions create a metabolic environment hostile to cancer, but supportive of healthy cells. The goal is not deprivation, it's precision, providing the right fuels for normal cells while removing fuels cancer cells rely on. Ketogenic strategies shift energy metabolism, so healthy cells thrive on ketones, a fuel cancer cells cannot use. Exercise stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis. Anti-inflammatory diets reduce collateral damage to mitochondria. Sleep ensures repair and replication. Targeted supplements provide the cofactors mitochondria need for energy production. This multi-pronged approach magnifies results far beyond any single intervention. Case studies underscore the effectiveness of these strategies. Patients in their 70s with aggressive glioblastomas, normally facing dismal survival rates, have lived years beyond expectations when metabolic approaches were integrated with low-dose targeted pharmaceuticals. Breast cancer survivors have achieved complete remission through consistent application of diet, lifestyle, and mitochondrial support. People with chronic age-related declines report returning energy, cognitive clarity, and even the ability to reduce or discontinue medications they believed were lifelong necessities. These outcomes aren't luck. They are the result of applied metabolic science, targeting the underlying mechanisms driving cancer and cellular aging. Despite the clear evidence, metabolic interventions remain rare in standard oncology practice. Insurance-covered treatments often focus on high-dose chemotherapy and radiation, which, without metabolic considerations, may feed cancer and damage healthy cells. Globally, only a handful of clinics actively integrate these approaches as part of a structured care plan. The challenge isn't the science, it's adoption. Patients who learn these principles and demand metabolic strategies are helping shift the paradigm, accelerating broader acceptance and application.